Good afternoon. My name is Paul Kaboth. I'm the Community Development Officer at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. Welcome to the afternoon concurrent session. The topic is Connecting Hard-to-Serve Populations with Jobs. We have three excellent speakers here today, and their full bios are obviously on the app or in your folder. We have Marilyn Brown, who's a Franklin County Commissioner and Chair of the Franklin County Reentry Coalition from Franklin County, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. Maria Kim, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Cara program. And Nicole Smith, who's the Research Professor and Senior Economist at Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. And so our topic today is Connecting the Hard to Employ. And they're each going to talk, Maria and Marilyn are going to talk about the programs that they're intimately involved with and operate. And Nicole is going to provide some kind of general oversight, context-setting information. Hopefully, I didn't. That was what we talked about. So hopefully that's the case. Anyhow, so the structure for today, we have 90 minutes. They'll each do their presentations, and we'll have a Q&A, and then we have a fun surprise, and we'll see how it works. So we'll do that. So we should have plenty of time to get into this topic very, very deeply. And with that, I'm going to introduce Nicole and let her start.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I know you just, so I said a moment ago that I know exactly what to do, and then I clicked to the last end of slideshow. So let me make sure someone is going to help me get back to the one. Oh, I didn't click on my name. Okay, good. All right, so I know you just had, big famous actor. So I'm going to tell you, I'm not as dynamic as he is, neither am I as rich as he is, but I'm going to give you some numbers. That's what my forte is, and I'll talk a little bit about setting the pace and expectations before, we have the other two speakers tell you about their specific programs. I have a bunch of slides that I wanted to share with you, but as is always the case, on my way down here, I sort of changed what I wanted to say. This always happens. But, don't worry, it's still going to be relevant to the topic that we're talking about.
Thank goodness.
So, I came in here to this meeting, and like many of these other meetings that I go to, the similar types of meetings, I hear three words over and over again, and I'm sure you have. Recruitment, retention, and completion. Does that sound familiar? You've heard about it, right? So when we're talking about these types of communities and how do we really try to serve these hard-to-serve communities, we always hear the recurring theme of recruitment, retention, and completion. So I want to just talk a little bit about some of the research that we do at Georgetown and how it relates to each of the three topics. And while we emphasize recruitment, I think what we don't hear about a lot in the discussion is where you go. So that's one of the first things I want to talk about under recruitment, where you go, and why where you go matters. So we might spend a lot of time recruiting new students to new programs with the objective of getting them into post-secondary training programs and making sure that people get in there and they're enrolled and they move on from secondary into some sort of post-secondary institution. But we don't spend enough time talking about where they actually go. And I want to give you a few numbers on that. Between 1995 and 2009, new freshman enrollment increased by 15% for white Americans, so 15% for white Americans, 73% for African Americans, and that's within each category. So whites increased their enrollment by 15%. For African Americans increased their enrollment by 73%, and Latinos or Hispanic Americans increased their enrollment by 107%. But where do they go? if we try to figure out where they go, between that same period, 1995 to 2009, 3% of the change in new enrollment in open enrollment institutions went to white Americans. 68% of the change in open enrollment institutions were African Americans, and 72% Latinos. So once you look at open enrollment, community colleges, open enrollment schools, the majority of the movement of new enrollees, of new students, were actually African American and Latinos. When you look at selective colleges and selective schools, the ones that are usually much more difficult to get into, those selective colleges, then we find a totally opposite. The 82% of the new enrollment, white Americans, 9% African Americans, and a 13% increase for Latino Americans. So why does it matter? Why do we care? Well, we care because, for several reasons. We care because the spending on institution matters. So we find that the spending per pupil in selective colleges and universities is 5 times as much as spending on open enrollment institutions. So when you have the majority of students going to open enrollment being African American or Latino students, and we have less spending on those institutions, we find that the outcomes are usually different. So we care about the outcomes as well. For those who attend open enrollment schools, then only 21% of them are likely to go to graduate school. So 21% of people who attend open enrollment schools go on to graduate schools. And 35%, a higher number, 35% of people who attend selective schools actually go on to graduate schools. What about the dropout rates? For those people who are highly qualified and able to attend post-secondary institutions, and I'm using the word qualified based on your GPA as well as their the scores in entrance exams. The dropout rate is 27% for white students, 44% for African American students, and 45% for Latino students. And this dropout rate is for people who either have started college and never complete, or have started college and they're unable to complete 8 years later. So that's the dropout rate. So in terms of thinking about recruitment, I think, we spend a lot of time emphasizing that we need to get people into schools. We need to ensure that the pipeline takes us from secondary into post-secondary. But part of the discussion requires that we also get people into selective type schools. And there's a number that I think is really important to us as well, that we've spoken about. Every year, 111,000 college-ready African American and Latino students do not attend college or do not enroll. So there is a distinct race issue here when it comes to who's going to have access to schools, who actually enrolls in colleges and universities. We have this unmet pocket of people, 110,000 students, who are college ready by every definition, but they never enroll and they never complete college. They never, actually get into a program up to 4 years after graduating from high school. So that's a concern. What about retention? So we talked about recruitment, we talked about retention. So this is another topic everyone talks about. Once we get them into college, we care that we retain them. But I also care about what majors people pursue in college. And this is a little bit of a sticky topic, as you can imagine. I mean, I'm part of Georgetown University, which is a liberal arts college. And we spend a lot of time talking about the payback to majors. What's the value of college majors? And it makes people a little bit uncomfortable, because in saying that some majors are valuable, the subtext is maybe there are some majors that might not be so valuable. So here's the concern. If we know that there are long-term benefits to pursuing certain types of majors, and these benefits are not only what you can earn in terms of wages, but long-term benefits in terms of, okay, what you connect to at the next level, what types of graduate school you can go to, then that information should be available to students. Students should know exactly which majors connect to which types of jobs, and what's the long-term career trajectory that certain majors get you to. So once you're in college and you're pursuing a certain type of major, then people need to know where you can actually get this major, what you're going to do with this major, what's the next step. We spend so much time as educators concerned about what happens to the student while they're in college. Okay, let's make sure you complete college, let's make sure you get out of here, you select your major, you pick your major, that very often we don't really spend any time trying to figure out what happens after. And that's a really important aspect of the student's life as well. You need to know, at least we need to know, what are they going to do after, and exactly the benefit of certain types of majors that they pursue. And under completion, so we spoke a little bit about recruitment, retention, and under completion. Once you complete the degree, what types of jobs? And there's a lot of conversation, most recently by the Ed Department, that talks about gainful employment. Most of you have heard this. Gainful employment is legislation that tries to attach some sort of wage threshold, especially for the for-profit institutions, to make sure that the programs that they provide their students are attached to a certain amount of wage if they get access to public funds. So what gainful employment actually does is it says, look, if you are going to recruit students into your program, and these students are engaging, for a certain amount of time, if it's for-profits, maybe 2 to 4 years, in some type of certificate, associate's degree, or bachelor's degree, then at the end of the year, this ought to be in a program that ensures that they actually, can repay their student loans. A program that pays some amount of money, a program that's useful, a program that has demonstrated success for other people in the past that have pursued this program. So this discussion about, how do we deal with difficult populations, I think, at some point we have to speak about really better connecting what people study in schools, exactly what they study in post-secondary institutions, with what types of potential jobs they can get by the time they graduate. So let me show you now the slides that I prepared before for this discussion. So why education? Most people know why education. We've spoken about this before. If I were to take a survey for the room, I guess we can all come up with these responses ourselves. Education signals motivation to employers. So certain types of education, it signals you were motivated, you were able to complete a program, you can sit down. I tell my relatives who are in college right now, it's just an exercise in time management. Just do the things. Just finish the exercises. Make sure you do it to the best of your ability. Then it demonstrates that to your employers. You get higher earnings. So on average, the more educated you are, on average there is a hierarchical relationship that exists between the level of education and how much you can earn in the workforce. I say that on average because, there are always exceptions to every rule. From the state perspective, you have higher taxes, revenues, higher labor force participation rates. We know that the more educated people are, the much more likely they are to participate in the labor force. We know about improved health outcomes, lower rates of mortality, and lower rates of crime and increased civic engagement. In terms of the earnings potential and lifetime earnings, here is a chart that looks at the hierarchical relationship. So at the bottom of the chart, we talk about high school dropouts and how much you can potentially earn across your lifetime. And you go all the way up to, people with high school diploma, some college, AA, BA, master's, doctoral degree and professional degree. And it sort of looks like the sort of stepwise graph that you expect. We often definitely want to separate males from females because we know that there's a gender wage gap. And by virtue of being female, I guess, or by virtue of certain types of occupations, we know that women earn less than men. And what's the standard number that you hear all the time in the news? What's the gender wage gap? 77 cents on the dollar. Okay, so you hear 77 cents on the dollar, and that 77 cents on the dollar doesn't control for anything. But if you control for education, you control for tenure, you control for years of school, which is equivalent to education, how long you've worked, you control for union status, whether in a union, you could control for occupational choice and industry choice, you control for all of those things. Then you take the gender wage gap from 77 cents on the dollar to, any guesses? No guesses? Come on, you can guess that. What do you think? If I were to control for everything else, because they like to tell you that the reason women get 77 cents on the dollar is that, you know, they're not in school. So you're saying 80? Close. It's about 90. All right, so once we control for all those things, we're 90 cents on the dollar. And Claudia Golding, another Harvard economist, recently released a report that shows, listen, even if we were to look at, if we compare apples to apples, and we take men and women at the same point in their career, with the same level of education, at the same majors, in the same occupations, the gender wage gap still exists. So don't tell me that it's only about tenure and it's only about Claudia Goldin, Goldin. So she just released that report maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So they show that even if you were to look at apples to apples, then it's not simply a case of tenure or years of schooling. What's interesting about this chart as well is it shows you that women almost have to have one extra degree to earn what a man earns at a lower degree. So that's information we need to know. Think. So a woman with a PhD will earn what a man with a master's degree earns on average. A woman with a bachelor's degree will earn what a man with an associate's degree has on average. A woman with an associate's degree will earn on average what a man with some college has on average. That's sort of the way the world works. And I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying that's how it works. And maybe we need to let people know this and let our students know this. And as a teacher, what I often do when I ask my girls and my boys, my male and female students, my men and women, well, what type of career do you have in mind? Where are you looking? What do you want to do? And interests and values, it's bifurcated. You could draw a line and you know exactly what types of careers men want to pursue and what types of careers women want to pursue. No objections to that. People have their own interests and values. You're free to select it. This is what makes America beautiful. But then I ask, well, what type of car do you want to drive? And what type of house do you want to live in? And where do you want to live? What type of community do you want to live in? Where do you think, what are the types of answers to these questions? And once we move from there backwards, then students get to see a clearer picture of the decisions you make now might impact later on. The types of career you choose now and the types of wages, potential wages you choose now might have an impact later on. I often, and sometimes when I'm done talking about these things, people in the audience say, so are you saying we shouldn't study Shakespeare? Shakespeare was my favorite in college. My major was math though, but I loved sitting in. I loved sitting into all of the literature and Shakespeare classes. I really did. I just loved the language and the imagery and all that stuff. But when we look at the types of competencies, that are required throughout the workforce, we observe that more and more it seems as if STEM competencies are required across occupations. And I'm gonna move to that actually without skipping some of my other charts. What did I do again? Okay. So in the previous chart, we sort of showed this hierarchical relationship between what men earn and what women earn. And this particular table demonstrates that, there are always exceptions to every rule. So the types of decisions we make matters because some high school workers can actually earn more than some college. There's people in the middle with post-secondary vocational certificates in engineering that earn more than BAs. I'm not going to say which BA because I got in a lot of trouble with that before. But there's certain BAs that don't earn as much as people with certificates. I guess when I listened to the discussion earlier, people were talking about associate's degrees and middle skills and middle jobs and advanced manufacturing, and I can't reiterate how important those are right now as valid competencies with good earnings potential as well for people to, to move into their career and fields. So there are significant opportunities for people in the middle, but the types of selection matters. And I'm just gonna, because I'm sort of running out of time, I want us to think of gender bias in some jobs. So there's some jobs, when you look at the proportion of people in those jobs, they're predominantly women, and some jobs, you look at the proportion of people in those jobs, they're predominantly male. For some strange reason, jobs that are predominantly female always earn less. And, so as an example, even PhDs in biological science seem to earn less than PhDs in chemistry, because biological science is the field, the PhD science field that there are more women concentrated in. Nursing was a big surprise. Male nurses earn more than women nurses, and nursing is a field which is 90% female and 10% male. Why is that? Because male nurses tend to work in the OR. They tend to to get master's degrees and be anesthesiologists. They tend to work in psychiatric nursing. Those are the fields that pay less. So in terms of making recommendations for my girls, I often tell them, you need to go where the boys are. Because it seems, that men seem to pay much more attention to financial fulfillment in their job. What's important to you? Well, how much money I make. You ask the woman, what's important to you? Well, I need to feel comfortable, I need to have friends, I need to have community, I need to be close to where I live. Those, maybe we hear a lot about negotiation, and you asked me who this Claudia Golan was. She speaks a lot about negotiation skills, even in determining what wages we earn for women. You go in there and somebody offers you something that's below par, and you say, okay. Whereas the guy will say, oh no, you need to step that up by 10% before I even consider this. So I'm going to conclude by talking about competencies. And what we did is we looked at at a database that takes each occupation and tracks what the soft skills are that you need in that occupation for you to be successful in that occupation. And we found that over and over again, leadership, communications, analytics, and administrative skills seem to be some of the most important skills that are demanded by jobs across the board. Once we look at high wage, high skill, high demand jobs, then the cognitive skills that are required move over to the STEM field, the science, technology, engineering, and math field. So the high skill, high wage, high demand jobs are increasingly requiring more and more STEM competencies, and employers are rewarding those STEM competencies with wages and salaries. So to conclude, when we're talking to our students about which types of, first of all, we know that education matters. And we know that post-secondary matters. And for our economy today, post-secondary is really the only stepping stone that possibly gets us to those middle-class wages and middle-class earnings that we desire. However, in getting to post-secondary, where you go matters, what you take matters, and your long-term career pathway and trajectory also matters. So people need to know ahead of time what they're going to take, why they're taking it, and where they're going to take it before they make decisions that will affect their future and their earnings potential 20 years down the road. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. So,
I'll just escape out of here.
yeah, and then your name. Just
click on that.
Yeah, click on your name.
How high tech. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maria Kim. I represent an organization called the Cara program in Chicago, Illinois. So we're going to go a little downstream on the education spectrum to the extent that the population that I work with are folks who are largely affected by homelessness and poverty. About 75% of the folks that we work with have high school diplomas. Everybody else does not. So that just kind of gives you a little level set on the population I represent. So quick on Cara, what we are is a workforce development and leadership development organization for men and women affected by homelessness and poverty. Been around for about 23 years now, exclusively in Chicago, inspired by a great story involving Mother Teresa. So if you want a cocktail later tonight to ask me the story about Mother Teresa, I'd be happy to share that with you. It's a pretty cool story. But what I will say is that we have derived a solution that we believe works in terms of creating sustainable employment for this target population. And because we have the data to back that up, we've now set in place a 5-year strategic plan to basically, as it says on this slide, create hope for 5,000 individuals, create or secure 3,500 jobs over a 5-year time horizon, and ensure those who secure permanent or longer-term employment celebrate at least their first-year anniversary on the job. So 70% of folks will celebrate at least their first-year anniversary on the job. A meaningful metric because the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports about 49.9% for the same industries that we serve. So we're looking at not just job creation and job sustainability, but also kind of a holistic approach to self-sufficiency. And to put this data into context, it took us 10 years to do it in the past. So we're basically saying, giddy up, everybody. We want to do in 5 years what it's taken us a decade to do. And so what's the kind of theory behind that? This is a picture of our service delivery. And so for those of you in the back, I'll kind of walk you through the chevron so that you can see what each of them say. But just like M. Knight, do we call him M. Knight or do we call him M?
He called himself Knight.
He calls himself Knight. Okay, it's just like Knight said in his keynote. He had 5 rules. I'm talking about him like he's my best friend. Like, he had 5 rules of play for these schools, right? So these are kind of our 5 rules of play for our organization. So we have a pretty intensive referral and admissions process. We consider ourselves a step 2 organization. So we believe that the way to make workforce development work is to do smart partner strategies. We shouldn't kind of think of ourselves as an island unto ourselves in executing these solutions. So we network with over 100 different partner organizations, churches, faith-based organizations, domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, halfway houses, recovery homes, you name it. Those are our partners and they know how we roll. And so they can screen their population and see who's ready for the Cara program. And so what does ready look like? In this blue chevron, what we're doing is making sure folks are clean and sober. So if you're in recovery, you need to be 4 months clean and sober. Everybody pees in a cup before they get accepted into the program to verify that is the case. If you've been affected by the justice system, which is about half of our population, you need to tell the truth about it in the discovery process, so in the initial interviews with our staff. And so long as you tell the truth, we run a background report to validate what you said. If there's consistency in the two, you get in. If there is inconsistency, you do not. So the intent in this blue area is basically, did somebody vet for you? Did somebody kind of vouch for you and say, yes, this person is ready for this 32-hour-a-week boot camp program that I'll tell you about? 2, did they represent integrity, and did they disclose? If they pass all of those metrics, they get into our training program and they pass the blue chevron. And then we move on to this fat red chevron in the middle called life and career skills development. And very similar to what Nicole said, Nicole touched on this notion of the soft skills that are obviously in demand by the marketplace. We also roll that back a little bit and focus on what we call harder skills. I think the Department of Labor is now calling these essential skills, so that might be the new hot terminology nowadays from the DOL. But effectively, we talk about some crazy stuff in the classroom. We talk about love. We talk about, even God is thunderously applauding that component of our curriculum. We talk about love. We talk about forgiveness. Who do you need to forgive in order to really focus on this next step of your life? We do a conflict management exercise where, let's say I get picked as the CEO of this fake company, right? I get to pick who in my classroom I would terminate today, right now, based on their attitude, behavior, contribution to the team, productivity, so on and so forth. And that is a chaos-creating class. It's our conflict management class. Even though it's a simulation, we do it 10 times a year. We've done it for the last 11 years. It works every single time. because the individuals that get picked by that fake CEO get really frustrated and really angry. And kind of, why are you putting me on blast in front of the teacher? Who do you think you are? You know, and it creates conflict when we do it on purpose. We're a part of our design is to be provocative on purpose in order to create conflict in the classroom, so we can talk about what are you going to do when this happens in the traditional workplace. When somebody says something that upsets you, how do you kind of peel away the constructive and walk away from the rest? So we have this harder skills curriculum that's following in tandem with the traditional job stuff, interviewing skills, you know, presentation skills, goal setting, Microsoft Office classes, computer skills, all of those kind of traditional things, but in tandem these harder skills as well. You'll also see in the top chevron, there's a line that says clean slate. That's a business that we operate, and I'm going to go into all the different businesses that we operate to create basically transitional jobs for folks so they can build skills before we start shopping them in the private sector. And all that's happening during our training process. Ultimately, we then place folks into permanent employment in the private sector with relationships we've established over the last 2 decades of companies that continue to rehire, because not just because it's corporate socially responsible, right, but also because there's an economic value attached to the sourcing mechanism, because our retention is sticky, because it is effectively, right now it's ranking at about 28 points higher than national norms for the same industries that we serve. And then the last chevron, the green, is 1 year of intensive employment support in up to 2 years. So in that year, predominantly we're doing everything from budgeting. A lot of our folks are obviously coming off of public supports, right, as soon as they start earning an income. So we're navigating that budget of losing the public supports and then accessing new income. In some cases, in many cases, we're in a negative net income situation in the first 6 to 9 months of employment. Can you imagine what happens to somebody's incentive levels during that time period when they're making actually less money in-house than they were when they were on public supports? That's a conundrum that we need to have coaching to walk through and step through together. So we focus on stuff like that. We focus on working with a supervisor to make sure everything's copacetic on the job and that the individual is getting the supports they need to remain gainfully employed. And we also focus on housing. So how are we transitioning the individual from a transitional living situation into permanent housing once their employment has been stabilized? And then I mentioned the businesses that we operate. So we have 3. One is called Clean Slate. It's a neighborhood beautification business. It's about $2.1 million, has been in operation for about 8 years. Was co-founded by a managing director from Goldman Sachs, who was lent to us as part of a public service fellowship program they had in the mid-2000s. It's a neighborhood beautification business, again, $2.1 million, but most importantly produces about 250 transitional jobs per year for our hardest to employ. And so when I got this description about this particular session on the hard to employ, I interpreted it in my own lens. And for me, my lens of hard to employ is folks who've been recently incarcerated, folks who've been affected by extensive felony convictions, maybe low cognition, very limited work experience, and the private sector doesn't have a great palette for this population. So how do we create businesses and skill building opportunities to connect those individuals into permanent employment? That's what spawned the idea of Clean Slate. But let me walk you through these 3 businesses right quick to give you a sense. So Clean Slate, again, our first social enterprise back in 2005, it was for our hardest to employ. What are our folks doing? They're in, say, 20 some odd different communities in Chicago wearing these obnoxiously bright green jackets and whatnot year-round, and we're doing litter abatement. So we clean sidewalks, we're doing neighborhood beautification, we do light landscaping, snow removal, and we do the festival circuit, things like that. So just helping to revitalize communities. It's a very low barrier to entry business and a low barrier to entry job, so it's easy to get folks direct into employment. But most importantly, it helps us imagine what happens when you learn something in a classroom, but you don't really have an incubated work environment to kind of test out those classroom skills. Well, this allowed us to do it because drama happens, right? Work happens, people aren't meeting their goals, all kinds of stuff happens. You get in a fight with your supervisor, you're not meeting, you got your first evaluation and you're like, why am I getting a 6 when the rating should be a 9? Like, what's going on with that? So all of that drama, we want to create it and suss it out on our dime, in our shop, under our leadership, so that we can help folks practice and build those skills of working in a team and that level of productivity before we place them in the private sector. So that's Clean Slate. Over time, we've been able to differentiate the services that we offer. So like a business, P.S. Actually, it took us 7 years for this business to be in the black. I do want to be clear about that statement. A lot of folks think, oh, social enterprise, panacea, it drives revenue for the firm, it builds skills for folks in need of workforce development. That is true, but it doesn't necessarily drive profit out of the gate. Right? And just like any small business, what are the statistics now? 4 or 5 small businesses are doomed to fail within the first 5 years of operation. Those statistics are staggeringly higher for social enterprises because we're effectively kind of sabotaging our own business by taking our top performing staff and placing them in the private sector. So it's like I'm taking all the good talent and I'm stripping it from my business and putting it in the private sector because that's mission for me. I want to make sure those folks get into permanent employment and they don't stay into transitional employment right here, right? But that's not the ingredient for a really thriving, profitable business. So it took us a minute to get this to be in the black. 7 years, no joke. So for folks who kind of are on the mantra of social enterprise is the panacea, please exercise your conversations with them with due caution because that is not necessarily the case. Over time, for us to get vibrant, though, we were able to enter into these other different service lines like pressure washing, graffiti removal, things like that in order to increase our revenue play. This just shows us how our geography has increased over time. Second social enterprise is called TCP Staffing. It's a bad name. I'm working on a rebranding, but for now, just kind of deal. TCP Staffing is just less than a year old. It's a temporary staffing firm. So we are in the business of placing folks into employment, right? And we realize that the sector is actually leaving the depot without us because all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, really since the Great Recession, folks are moving to try before you buy. Folks are like, I don't need to hire permanently anymore. That's not how things work right now. I can hire temporarily, or I can hire temp to perm, or I don't have to offer the benefits that I used to, yada, yada, yada. So that was happening whether or not we liked it. Right? And we had to face the reality of if that's happening, whether or not we like it, either we're going to play in the game or we're going to let the game pass us. So we decided just under a year ago to inaugurate our own temporary staffing business. Think of it like a mini Manpower. As a boutique firm, we're barely going to break probably $450,000 in year one. And we're slowly learning how to price correctly for the jobs that we're sourcing for and whatnot. But what it is doing is it's giving us entree into different corporate partners that previously weren't working with us that could ultimately then hire folks for long-term employment. And it's creating an opportunity, more importantly, for our individuals to develop skills, much-needed skills, to increase their marketability downstream. And these are the types of companies that it introduced us to. So basically, but for the temporary staffing firm, I wouldn't be working with the companies on here. Obviously, the most notable are, Accenture, Equity Residential, and JP Morgan Chase. They weren't hiring our individuals direct hire because they're more trepidatious. These are large-scale firms that have higher risk aversion, and so they were more interested in a try before you buy, and we were able to sell them on the value prop of temporary staffing because we had our own business in this area. This is our third business to also help folks develop skills. It's called Chapter 2. Between us girls, I'm not sure if this business is actually going to survive, so you guys have a little insider intelligence, but I wanted to tell you what we're trying to do just to incubate businesses in order to create a wedge in this market. Effectively, what happened was we started studying waste-based businesses. So this is, folks who like to go dumpster diving and basically take other people's trash and turn them into treasure. There's slowly lots of businesses that are popping up as a result, not the least of which are like mattress recycling. Folks go and take mattresses out of the waste stream and strip all the stuff on the innards and the metal and recycle all that stuff and sell it. Glass recycling and books. People take used books out of the waste stream and try to upsell them on Amazon.com or through another online distribution channel. That's what we're doing. We're taking them and selling them where we can on Amazon, and the stuff that we can't sell, we're pulping it to make some money off of the recycled paper. But more importantly, this is a skill play for our students. So, I'm only getting so far in a neighborhood beautification business, right? Because that's a pretty manual labor job. I'm getting some differentiated skill set through the temporary staffing firm. But with this kind of warehousing operation, we wanted to build warehousing and inventory management and customer service skills. So all of these kinds of things to help differentiate our students. And ultimately, all of these businesses, again, drive revenue, not necessarily profit, and skills for the individuals that we serve. So that we can ultimately produce these results. So this kind of gives you a smattering of what ends up happening with folks that are served through Cara. I already reviewed the screening and training that happens, and perhaps I didn't underscore that second bullet point enough. When folks are with us in our training program, this is a 32-hour-a-week intensive program. Folks are punching a clock every day. The class start is 8:30, so you have to punch in by 8:25. And sorry, I just can't say. Okay. And then there's a intensive write-up policy. So if you come in late, you don't dress professionally, you don't do your homework, you have a crappy attitude, you don't follow protocol, you get a write-up. If you accrue 4 write-ups, you get dismissed from the program. And the reason why we do that, you get dismissed gently. I don't kick people in the butt, right? You get dismissed gently. There's a whole safety net of services that happens. But the reason why that dismissal protocol is in place is because we're a two-sided network. We understand that we're serving the individuals, but we're also serving companies downstream in order to ensure that they have a long-term product that they can enjoy. This gives you a smattering of the hiring partners that we work with, probably the largest of which is Hyatt, University of Chicago Medicine, Walmart, and locally in Chicago, that CTA is the Chicago Transit Authority. And finally, I might leave you with this notion on our social return on investment. So part of what you need to do, or part of what we've found that we need to do as a workforce development organization, is we need to constantly be proclaiming our value prop to the companies that we work with. And in this case, what we've done is we've followed a cohort of individuals we placed into permanent employment a few years ago. And we looked at what are they now pumping into society as a result of their income taxes, their Social Security, and sales tax dollars that they spend on stuff because they now have net income, right? It's 1.3 million. And then on top of that, we layer what are the savings to society as a result of that individual being gainfully employed. Well, they're no longer leveraging cash assistance, no longer leveraging food stamps, not using unemployment, not using the emergency room as their primary form of health care, not subject to rearrest costs if they're still employed at the end of that 1 year. And that's a much larger number, closer to 6 million. I total those up and look at them over a 5-year time horizon, discount to today's value, and divide by our operating costs to start a conversation with prospective investors that we believe every dollar in may produce about $5.75 of social cash value over a 5-year time horizon. To slowly start moving the conversation from just charity or philanthropy, as it were, but to investment. You know, how are we partners in this investment in a social solution for our city? That's it for me. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Marilyn. And again, if you just click on the name.
I will do that. Well, I am thrilled to be here and trying to get to clicking on that. Okay.
I'm still not seeing the thing.
No.
I messed it
I'm
up.
thrilled to be here.
Messed it up.
And I feel like if we were working together with Cara, we would be even more effective. As you see, the title of the presentation is Recycling a Workforce, One Resident at a Time. I am an elected official in Franklin County, Ohio, which is right in the center of Ohio. A bit about Franklin County, but before I tell you a bit about Franklin County, I would say, as an elected official, what I do and what my staff does every day is look at the policies that we develop and that all of you develop, and we have to implement on the fly with every call that comes into our office, and we get hundreds a day in just my office. We have to implement, and we never know what those calls are going to be. We are implementing policy all the time. So one of the programs I want to talk about today is the work that I am doing on reentry. which perhaps is one of the most hard to serve populations that you will see. Gotten involved in this initiative a couple of years ago. I speak to a lot of folks in our prisons, as do my staff. But before we get into that, a little bit about Franklin County. So here's Franklin County in the center of Ohio. We are the capital of the state capital, Columbus, Ohio. We have 1.2 million residents in our county, and we are increasingly diverse. We are the fastest growing county in Ohio. We are the only growing county in Ohio. We are also the most divergent county in Ohio. And as this photo will show you, we have we're the fastest growing county, but we're also the highest poverty rate in the area. So we've got a lot of great things going on, and we've got high poverty. So as we look at Ohio and its prison population, I want to give you a little bit about the incarceration statistics. We've got 50,540 incarcerated in 32 prisons in Ohio. We go into Franklin County alone, and we've got 1,554 incarcerated residents, 2 county jails, and 45,000 bookings per year. More than 5,000 children with at least one incarcerated parent, and direct costs of more than $108 million in incarceration costs, $210 million in dependent care. And if you know anything about counties, we are the ones that provide the safety net services. So that dependent care means child support enforcement, means those who are on job and family services getting SNAP benefits. They're the ones that are getting all of our safety net services. Indirect opportunity costs loss of more than $11 million of income and sales tax. Also, counties receive sales tax, and we live and die by sales tax numbers. Conservatively, that's $329 million lost annually just in my county. So, I wanted to get into what a typical workforce development strategy looks like. And I'm going to read it to you, and you can read it online there. We will show reentering residents in straightforward terms how to navigate their individual skills gap relative to the current workforce gap analysis, thereby build competent human capital capable of executing both tangible and intangible marketplace benefits. You know what my grandson, who's 9, would say about this? He'd say, "That's just crap, Grandma. That's just crap." And he's right. That I don't know if you got anything out of that definition, but I sure don't. And I don't relate to anything in that definition. What reentering residents need is what every single employee needs. They need the hard skills that have been talked about here on this panel and at lunch today and on every panel in this program. They also need a solid foundation of soft skills, and everybody's talked about the soft skills: communication, conflict resolution, self-discipline, leadership skills, communication, teamwork, positive attitude. The difference in this population of re-entering residents, and I do mean residents, because as I go into the prison talking to inmates in the prison, many of them are coming home to my county. They are my residents, they are my constituents, and I tell them that. The difference in this population, though, is that they may have never possessed these work-appropriate soft skills, and even if they did, they had to subvert them while they've been incarcerated. They could not survive with some of these skills while incarcerated, and they tell us that. And you know why they tell us? Because we ask. Don't assume or presume to know what these folks need. And I know my colleagues here know that. Some need housing, some need medical and dental care, some need mental health and substance abuse, some need transportation, some need identification, some need all of these. And some really just need an alarm clock and a wallet. And the reason I know this is because I asked, and my staff members have asked. They've asked the questions, and if you would hear the answers about an alarm clock, you'd be astonished. Re-entering residents who have been woken up for years by somebody else, when they get home, they need an alarm clock. They don't have a cell phone. They need to know to get up at a certain time. Such a simple thing. And they need a wallet. They didn't have a wallet, or it was taken away from them in prison. They need a wallet to make them feel like they are humans again. Not so difficult. You have to ask the questions. What do you need? Don't ever assume or presume anything. So here we have some statistics on incarceration figures. And we know this, the national recidivism rate is 43%. That's high. It's very high. In Ohio, the recidivism rate has been brought down to 29%, and that's pretty darn good. In Franklin County, it's even better. That's my county. It's 27%. Looks pretty good. This is my office's recidivism rate, 3%. Now, I want to say here, there's a caveat. When we go out to the prisons, we don't give a lot of information handouts. We give a business card to every inmate we talk to. We say, when you get out, call us. Call my office. You're my constituent. You are coming back to my county. We can help you with all kinds of things, but you need to call. So that 3% represents the people that self-select, obviously, 3% though. That's astonishing. And they do call. They call a lot. They write to our office. We write back. We answer every call because they are our constituents. So it gets down to something really very basic. If your washing machine broke down, you'd probably fix it. So why not do the same thing for the repair person? What we've looked at and talked to so many people in our community, and I sit on boards with business community leaders, business leaders. I sit on this board called Columbus 2020. It's all the top leaders in our business community. They're all talking about they can't find workers. They need to import workers for jobs. And I talk about all kinds of ways that we have employees that can work in their employment centers. They have call centers. We've got the nation's biggest insurance companies in our community. So what we're doing is looking at workforce from the employer's site. And we're saying we've got raw material, the employees. We've got all these employees who need jobs. Tell us what you need, employer. We will bring you workforce-ready employees, and we will guarantee all the soft skills. We will guarantee on our dime that we can give you employees to do the job. And we put our money where our mouth is. Here's a guy on your left, Vernon Dublin. In Franklin County, we hired Vernon Dublin with a felony record. We hired him. He'd been in prison for many, many years, hooked him up with a mentor. He was hired as a temp. He's now been with us for over a year. He's got benefits, full benefits, health insurance, all kinds of benefits. He came to my office. He said, I've never had health insurance. I've never had dental care. The only health insurance the only health care I got was in prison. What do I do? So all you have to do is know to ask. We provide all these services with no additional investment, no additional money. These are our constituents, our residents. We handle the calls just like we handle any other call. 2 minutes, I can do it. We handle these callers just like we handle any other one. All we ask is, what do you need? And wouldn't it be outstanding if every elected official could do that? And every person in the community who dealt with this community could just ask the question, what do you need? And get the answer. It's astonishing what you can do when you know what people need. So we could do this with all of these folks, people who are in the shelter system. We can save money. We can do a lot of work. I end with this artwork that's right here in Philadelphia. It's at GlaxoSmithKline. It's called Freedom. It's an artwork by Zenos Ferdakis, and to me it speaks about what we're all trying to do in getting people who are difficult to place into employment at livable wages in sustainable jobs. And what do you need? How can my office help? I'm here to help. So that's my contact information, and I'm happy to answer questions. And thank you.
Thank you. So now we come to the Q&A session, and as in previous breakouts, if you have questions, we have a microphone. Otherwise, I have questions that'll keep us here all the way till 4 o'clock, because that's my responsibility, along with passing notes and keeping time. So I'm going to kick it off with my moderator's prerogative, since nobody sprinted to a microphone. Nicole, you mentioned that it's important to connect students' study with their careers. So that, post-secondary education, whether it's associates or baccalaureate, or whatever, but it would be important to connect that area of study with what they want to do. And you shared the example of asking questions. So how do we do a better? How do we as a society do a better job of that for students?
So I think from a state-to-state perspective, about 22 states already have made that connection. About 22 states so far have been able to trace students from post-secondary all the way through to the workforce, especially using their UI, unemployment insurance wage records. And as such, we can make the connection between, where they're working, how much they're making, what's the tenure of the job, and whether or not we notice upward mobility and transitioning from one job to the next, especially if that person later on gets a credential that's a little bit higher. What's the marginal effect of taking that credential? So in answering your question, I think what's important is for us to then go backwards and relay that information to the students, so the students have a better notion, particularly students who are in the liberal arts, where the career pathway and trajectory is not as well defined as, say, someone who's in STEM or someone who's in nursing, where they know exactly where they're going to go, can relay that information so that they know what their prospects are.
Would that be at the high school level, the college entry level? I mean, operationally, what would be the, from your judgment, your experience, what would be the best approach to that?
Well, so there's several things. When it comes to making career decisions, a lot of us know that, it's almost, by the time you start in elementary school, we're building on information that takes us all the way to college. So sometimes the further back you go, the better. But the final career-ready and career-ready decision is actually made, I think, when you're in secondary on the way to post-secondary. So I think that's where the information can be most useful to students, at least those who are in college, freshmen in colleges, or those who are about to go to college. That's useful. But let me give you one more statistic that I forgot to talk about when we were talking. So Knight, as you all are calling him now,
our good friend Knight.
Our good friend Knight he said something about early childhood education, and I just wanted to pull that up because now everybody's all excited about early childhood education. Now we spend all the money from age 0 to 5, and we're going to see all the good rewards after that. And we know that to some extent that's really true, because 50% of the variation in earnings that you observe for adults actually takes place between the ages of 0 and 18. So what happens by the time you're 18 really determines 50% of your earnings variation. So we know that that's true. But what happens to the other 50% that's after your age 18 as well? So, I know we have, and it's largely driven by other economists and Nobel Prize-winning economists like Heckman, that we should focus so much of our monies on early childhood education. But even adult literacy programs are still working and have worked. We care about language programs and engagement programs. So it's not all, we should not necessarily focus all our energies just on the youth. But we know that parental education matters. So we know that a more educated parent leads to better outcomes for their children as well. So we need to make sure that some of the energies also go to adults in the program.
Thank you. So this is for Maria, you, and Marilyn. And the reason I'm including you, Marilyn, is I'm presuming that the work in Franklin County is connected to employers. You kind of implied that. So with these hard-to-employ populations, particularly the formerly incarcerated, but I don't think it has to be limited to that, for the group, what would be a strategy, or what was your strategies to partner with employers? Because it's, at least for me, it's not intuitive that that's exactly where they want to go. So what was the strategy for the Cara program to build the relationships with employers? I think we understand, you have your own kind of businesses where they get experience and you can provide that. But, at the start, what was the strategy to make those relationships with those firms, and the same for Franklin County?
So we would minimize the sell on mission and focus the sell on the value proposition, where the value proposition is that they're getting a talent pipeline that's going to stick longer than what they're paying, or what they're getting rather, from off the street recruits for free. So it was more a sell on the value prop than it was on mission. And then once we were able to secure a base of employers, we asked for referrals. Like, it worked for you guys. Can you introduce me to the chief of HR at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and so on and so forth.
And what we do is look at employers who are in desperate need of employees. We've got a group of our largest employees who have call centers, who have logistics operations. We've got Roadmaster, who always hires those that we have, because Roadmaster, once we get them out of prison, or get folks who have been on job and family service benefits for a long time, we've got an employer in Roadmaster who will help them get the certification that they need to be able to drive a large truck and be able to then be a very dependable employee. And he's our great source of a referral to anybody else, because it works for him and has worked for years.
So if I could just kind of delve a little bit, so that the initial connection with Road, I mean, how did I mean, because again, it's not like, unless that organization was extremely desperate, that they're out looking for, the formerly incarcerated, I would imagine.
He was looking for employees, and he came to Franklin County, to our Job and Family Services Department years ago, and we had a contract with him where we were paying $35,000 to get him some employees who would go through training, and if they made it through the training, they would get their CDL license, which is the big rig license that they needed. They could also be a bus driver with that license. And that was at least 8 years ago. And with that, he was so thrilled that he's now doing it on his own without that $35,000 we were giving him.
Okay. Tom?
I have a question specifically about the reentry population. There are a number of laws both at the state and federal level that will prohibit them from working in certain fields, or from being able to get loans to access education. I was hoping maybe each of you could talk a little bit about those, how you overcome them, and the ways in which they pose challenges.
We reduce as many barriers as we can, one at a time, with every resident that contacts us. And whether it's getting their driver's license, we work with the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, we work with every agency we can in Ohio. And I'm originally from Cleveland, so I know the Ohio laws that, being in Columbus now, we're right in the heart of state government. So we reduce the barriers that we can. Franklin County took the box off of our application that asks if they have a felony. Some employers have that, some don't. We still do a background check, and if they have a felony record, they do, and it's not an automatic exclusion to jobs. Some jobs are going to be off limit, though. And there's not a lot we can do. There's some bonding program, though, at the state of Ohio now that will allow some bonding to occur if you hire somebody in certain trades, that you can get that bonding, and that's new. And that's with Representative Tracy Hurd in Ohio, really got that off the ground. So I'd be happy to talk with you afterward in Ohio specifically.
I guess for us, we kind of just look at that as the rules of engagement. So it is what it is. I don't have the political power to influence it one way or the other, so I'm just going to accept it as a reality and work, despite it. So our biggest need is always to find conviction-friendly employers. But what we do is we have a captive sales force that's on staff whose job it is to create those institutional relationships. And once we're able to find one, typically in the manufacturing, more janitorial fields and things like this, we're able to leverage that success to propagate again. But for me, it's just kind of like it is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it, so I have to figure out how to play within the system as opposed to kind of use my small force to fight against it.
Hi, my name is Morgan. I'm at Fells Institute at Penn. And my question might be for Maria, but it could also be maybe for Marilyn. So yesterday, during Jeffrey Brown's presentation, I'm not sure if you were able to catch that, but he does work on fresh food access, and he tries to hire locally, and he does, and he has really wonderful results with that in Philadelphia. I'm a big fan of his work. He mentioned that it costs, as much as 4 times to kind of hire locally, because there's a good amount of training that needs to be done, for his operations. And when I hear you talk, Maria, I think probably people who are coming out of your program, that cost wouldn't be incurred then on the employer, kind of 4 times. So based on, and even if you just limit your remarks to the Chicago market because you feel like you know that better, do you feel like that gap there is it just that there are not enough available funds to kind of scale programs like yours, which, reduce the costs on employers? Or is it also maybe some kind of misperceptions where there's just not communication between the private sector and public sector, and it's more like the solution there is partnerships because, it's really not as much of a financing issue as one might think. Maybe it's both, but I would just love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
I definitely think it's both. When we think about what our challenges are, we always say jobs and money. Sorry. If people ask, well, you can only choose one, I choose jobs. Because if we get more jobs, the money will follow, the investors will follow. But to be clear, the cost of our so I showed you guys that Chevron thing, the screening, training, placement. Just to get to placement for our organization takes on average 6.5 months for somebody to be in our shop 4 days a week for them to be effectively placed into permanent employment. That's after multiple tries of getting hired, right? So the duration of time on average, particularly post-Great Recession, is about 6.5 months, which is to say that the costs incurred to get that person to placement is approximately $7,800 per individual placed into permanent employment. So I'm incurring that investment before I send them to the corporate partner, and certainly I would hope that my talent is competitive and would not be 4 times, right, the rate of their off the street. So I guess the first issue is the money piece because it's costly. I don't want that picture up there to seem like, oh, it's transactional. Once you get that formula right, it's all good. It's costly. To do that kind of work is intense, it's intensive, it's intimate, and it's costly. So that's one. And then 2, I guess you're right that being able to find private partners who would want to hire at scale is really where the magic is, because we used to have partners at scale before the Great Recession, but now folks hire 1 or 2 people at a time. So now I need hundreds of employment partners to get any kind of critical mass, and it requires much more strategic partners at a higher level in order to move the needle.
Okay.
This is
Donna, just before the question, Marilyn, do you have any just rough time or dollars invested on the Franklin County program?
What I would say is you need the supports for that person that gets employed, and I agree with Maria that it is costly for anybody to do hiring. It's more costly, though, for an employer to hire somebody off the street or through their HR regime regularly, have that person leave, hire again, train, have that person leave. What we do, and it sounds like Maria does, is give them a fully vetted person, which is very costly, but it's going to be somebody who absolutely wants that position, and then you put the supports around them and make sure that they're going to be okay. We work closely with Jewish Family Services and other organizations similar to what Cara does, and make sure that they're going to be okay. And the other thing that's critical is we're putting people into livable wage jobs so that they don't fall off the benefits cliff and end up worse financially. We're trying to get people from poverty into sustainable living wage jobs so they can support their families. And that's what we're absolutely committed to doing. And, you know, these are folks that want to work and are dependable and have constraints, transportation. They're one step away from not getting to work that day. So those supports are critically important.
Donna Brooks from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, and this is sort of a segue. I'm going to go all the way to the very beginning. How do you find some of these candidates for these programs? Those of us in the community development world know that we're fighting, and I'm not going to use the word apathy because apathy shows that they don't care, the resignation. The areas of the people who they do care, but they just think, okay, you know, my dad did this at minimum wage for his entire life. That's my future. I can't go past that. What programs, how do you go about it? And have you found things in your studies?
I'll take a stab, and Nicole, if you want to contextualize any further. So our poster child, I don't know what the proper word is, our poster whatever student would be somebody who's sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we actually market it as such. We kind of want this to be the last stop that you have before you are really in the position to ultimately lift your family out of poverty. So that's one. And two, I would say our students are the best ambassadors, particularly because of Clean Slate. So if you can imagine Clean Slate, at any given time, there are 60 to 80 people with these, again, obnoxiously bright shirts that are in the very communities that they came from, in the very communities that are the most hardest hit by reentry from the prison system, in the very communities that are the heaviest hit by poverty. And they're out there sweeping. And they're out there saying hi to everybody and saying, hey, this service is brought to you by such and such Chamber of Commerce down the street. You know, go say thank you. And then people will look at them and say, I remember you from high school. Mm-hmm. Like, what's up with that job? Like, how do I get into there? How do I get a piece of that action? And it creates the portal for a conversation. So I think it's some combination of marketing the value that you want to bring to the individuals you're serving and how that's different than every other place that's giving them services. And then two, building upon that, how you message, brand ambassador your service from alumni effectively of your work.
So the question regarding how do we find these people, just to clarify, when I think of difficult to serve populations, the type of research we do for difficult to serve populations is not only limited to incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. We also look at low income. Mm-hmm. We look at people who are long-term unemployed. We look at returning vets, and we also look at incarcerated. So that gives you an idea of exactly what our population is. And mm-hmm. we usually find them through many programs that are trying to connect institutions, post-secondary institutions, to job programs. So there's the Business Roundtable, through Chambers of Commerce, through we have another example of institutions, Change the Equation. So there are a number of these organizations where their objective is to locate these groups and to ensure that we better make the connection between workforce and the types of majors or post-secondary that they're pursuing. So I think where Maria and Marilyn are speaking to one subset, we are looking at those who are. Right now, my major focus is the long-term unemployed, people who have been unemployed for 27 weeks or more, and trying to figure out ways of making sure that they are returned to some type of long-term employment.
We go out and look for people. We go to the prisons. We talk to the inmates. that are soon to be released. And, they then call us. So, we're not waiting for the phone to ring.
The question I have is, out of the people that are here, do any of your hard-to-place populations, do they ever want to become self-employed or, like have a micro business, a barbershop, beauty salon, or, something like that? And how do you do that with them?
Some of the individuals that we serve do, but because we're in such an unstable living situation when folks are coming to us, we actually don't encourage that out of the gate. So we want to get them into stable employment and kind of restabilize their household finances and focus on moving them into permanent housing and stabilizing them there first before we do any kind of micro business exploration downstream. So I would not consider that a core competency of ours. We're more about placement in the private sector.
In Franklin County, in addition to the reentry work that I'm speaking about, we do work with those that have been unemployed for months, years. So we do have a program that we work with. It's called the Economic and Community Development Institute, and they offer microloans for entrepreneurship, and they will help somebody with business plans and get into whatever small business they want to do, if it makes sense. And they will help and counsel them into getting into whether it's a hairdresser business, whether it's a food business, or whatever kind of business it might be.
So, and just if I can just add one quick thing. So at my center, we don't actually work with programs, but I do know that from our data, about 14% of the people in this constituency actually become self-employed. And what we found as a useful model for them are those who we like to term the working learners. Those who are starting their own business and then subsequently getting the skills to run that business either through maybe community college, business courses. They're not necessarily creating a credential or getting a full credential in the sense of getting a certificate or a degree, but they're picking and choosing exactly which courses they might need to help them know, well, how do I start this business? What do I need to do to get it incorporated? And they're picking those particular courses from the community colleges to do that.
Emily?
Emily Garpachetti at the Fund for Our Economic Future in Cleveland, Ohio. I have a question about the role that your respective organizations in the public and nonprofit sectors, what gap do you think you're filling in terms of, do you think you're filling a gap that would otherwise be replaced with state or federal policies? And I'd like to hear just your reactions to that if you have them. And basically the intention is like how can we think more holistically about scaling up some of these best practices in a more structural way?
I wish somebody was doing more of what we do. There are, in Montgomery County, they do a wonderful job of reentry work. Commissioner Lieberman in Montgomery County in Ohio does a wonderful job of doing the reentry work that's done in Ohio. And I'm doing the reentry work in our county. I don't know of too many other people in Ohio that are doing what we do in Ohio. There are other programs and services, but I wish we could get more people to do what we do. We work closely with our nonprofit organizations. We work closely, very closely, with all of the nonprofits in town who are on our reentry coalition. And it'd be nice if they would all do direct service, and they don't do as much direct service as my office does. My policy director, Michael Daniels, is here, and he takes those calls day in and day out and helps people constantly. We wish more people would do it.
I guess from my perspective, what I found is that our population is not sexy. Just is the brutal reality of it. We're not cute kids, and we don't have the same weight as perhaps other target populations do. And so I look at the adults that we serve, and I see them as somewhat of a forgotten population. That folks think that, they're already on their way, to whatever outcome was predestined for them. So I'm not sure what infusion of work effort is going to turn that train around. So that's somewhat of my operating bias. But having said that, I think there are two power levers that we can exercise at the macro level that I don't think have been effectively done. One of which is a logistical one. Like, there's all these cool waivers that are out there and incentives theoretically to incentivize hiring partners to hire ex-offenders or veterans or folks that are in target economic development areas, so on and so forth. But to be honest, those processes to actually do the waiver are so onerous that they're a disincentive for most businesses to operate. And in fact, what ends up happening is the individuals who are in those programs are walking around with a little scarlet letter that basically says, I'm in an infected population, and that doesn't help for the organizational culture. So fixing that system to make it easier for a business to opt in would be a delightful change. And then secondly, we've seen this in Chicago. Our mayor has put a lot of pressure on the business community to create coalitions and raise, I think, up to $50 million towards gang violence in our city, or towards healing our city against gang violence. That same kind of political will and pressure needs to be applied on our employment partner community to say hire. And it can just happen if public sector leaders apply that kind of pressure to these bodies. But for whatever reason, it's a third rail topic that doesn't get enough airwaves. So I think in both those avenues, it would be a really great win for our work.
And just, I guess just to add a little bit of realism in terms of how we do it, I have to really commend Maria and Marilyn for what they do. The alternative just doesn't exist. I mean, a lot of what we do at Georgetown, for example, is funded by soft funds. So we go to foundations, and they provide funding for us to study these topics, or these hard-to-serve populations, and we present our models with discussions of what we want to do, our problem statements for low-income, long-term, returning vets and incarcerated, and they almost stop the conversation on returning vets. I mean, to get anyone to want to study this population or provide any type of funding, it's extremely difficult. So the alternative, even in the private sector partnerships, is almost non-existent. I mean, their eyes glaze over, and it's a non-starter in terms of what we can do with their monies in that regard. So it's difficult, and if they don't do it, I really don't see anyone else who's actually going to pick up the charge to help these populations.
Well, by my watch, we have about a minute left, and I'm not going to get to do the surprise, but you won't miss it anyway. Please join me in. Well, I was going to quiz the audience. That's part of it. It's an Q&A with the audience, which I'm not sure they would have answered my question. So please join me in thanking our panel. And please remember to fill out your evaluations, whether on the conference app or using the paper-based